The most advanced air superiority fighter on the planet just appeared over the Persian Gulf, and Iran's response was not defiance. It was silence. For weeks, Tehran had been threatening retaliation, promising fire and fury, broadcasting messages about closing the Strait of Hormuz and turning the Gulf into a graveyard for American forces. Then, on March 28, 2026, when F-22 Raptors materialized in Iranian airspace, every radar went dark, every surface-to-air missile battery stayed cold, and every command channel from Tehran to the Revolutionary Guard went quiet. This was not restraint. This was something else entirely. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications because what I am about to show you is not just another deployment story. This is about why the most technologically sophisticated military on Earth just demonstrated capabilities that Iran did not know existed, and why that demonstration fundamentally changed the calculus for every adversary watching. I'm going to show you exactly what happened when American F-22s conducted operations that should have been impossible according to every assessment Iran had made about its own defensive network. We will cover the specific technological advantages that made this penetration possible, the strategic doctrine that Iran built its entire air defense system around, and why that doctrine just became obsolete. We will examine what this means for the balance of power in the Middle East, how it affects ongoing operations against Iranian facilities, and why Russia and China are studying every second of this encounter. By the end, you will understand why silence from Tehran is far more significant than any threat they could have issued. Let me give you the strategic context that makes this development genuinely consequential. The Persian Gulf represents one of the most heavily defended airspaces on the planet. Iran has spent 4 decades building layered air defense networks specifically designed to deny access to American aircraft. This is not rhetoric. This is documented military doctrine backed by billions of dollars in Russian and Chinese missile systems, domestically produced radar networks, and strategic positioning of batteries across mountainous terrain that provides natural defensive advantages. Iran's air defense strategy rests on a concept called anti-access area denial, which military analysts abbreviate as A2AD. The idea is straightforward but effective. You do not need to defeat the American military in open combat. You just need to make the cost of entry so high that Washington decides the objective is not worth the price. Layer enough surface-to-air missiles across enough territory, integrate them with overlapping radar coverage, position them in terrain where they are difficult to target, and you create an environment where even the most advanced aircraft face unacceptable risk. Tehran has pursued this strategy with remarkable consistency. They deployed S-300 systems purchased from Russia, which can engage targets at ranges exceeding 120 miles. They built domestic variants like the Bavar 373, which Iran claims matches S-300 performance. They positioned shorter-range systems like the Tor M1 and Panzer to cover the gaps, creating overlapping fields of fire where aircraft that evade one battery fly directly into engagement range of another. They integrated these systems with early warning radars, some positioned on mountain peaks that provide line of sight across hundreds of miles of Gulf airspace. The geography reinforces this defensive posture. The Zagros Mountains run parallel to Iran's western border, providing elevated positions for radar and missile sites while complicating strike planning for attackers who must account for terrain masking and limited approach corridors. The Strait of Hormuz, just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, funnels maritime and air traffic through a constrained space that Iran can saturate with sensors and weapons. This defensive architecture has shaped American military planning for decades. During the Gulf War in 1991, coalition forces spent weeks degrading Iraqi air defenses before conducting deep penetration strikes. In Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, the air campaign again prioritized suppression of enemy air defenses as the essential first phase. The lesson has been consistent. Even against adversaries with less sophisticated systems than Iran currently operates, achieving air superiority requires time, resources, and accepting losses. Iran understood this calculus. Their public statements frequently emphasize that any American attack would be costly, that their defensive networks would exact a price that would make intervention politically unsustainable in Washington. They believed this deterrent effect provided strategic protection for their nuclear facilities, their drone production centers, and their naval assets. They built their entire strategic posture around the assumption that their airspace was defensible. That assumption just died. On March 28th, at approximately 0340 local time, F-22A Raptors from the 1st Fighter Wing penetrated Iranian airspace from the south, flying routes that took them directly over integrated air defense sites, past early warning radar stations, and within engagement range of multiple S-300 batteries. According to U.S. Central Command statement released 6 hours after the operation, American aircraft conducted reconnaissance and strike coordination activities over Iranian territory for approximately 47 minutes before exiting the area. Not a single Iranian radar achieved lock. Not a single missile launched. Tehran's response came 11 hours later, a brief statement denying that any violation of airspace had occurred. Think about what that means for a moment. Iran's entire defensive strategy, the billions spent on Russian missile systems, the decades of doctrine development, the strategic positioning across optimal terrain, all of it became irrelevant in 47 minutes. This was not a failure of equipment. This was a demonstration that the technological gap between American stealth capabilities and the most advanced defensive systems Iran can acquire or build is wider than Tehran understood. Let me show you exactly how the F-22 Raptor creates this capability gap. The aircraft's radar cross-section, the measure of how detectable it is to enemy radar, is classified, but publicly available estimates suggest it is roughly 0.01 square meters from certain aspects. To put that in context, a conventional fourth-generation fighter like the F-15 or Su-27 has a radar cross-section between 10 and 15 square meters. The F-22 is not just harder to detect. It is operating in a fundamentally different category of visibility. This stealth performance comes from every element of the aircraft's design. The airframe uses carefully calculated angles that deflect radar energy away from the transmitting source, rather than reflecting it back. The engines are buried deep in the fuselage with serpentine inlet ducts that prevent radar waves from reaching the highly reflective turbine blades. The weapons bays are internal, eliminating the massive radar returns that external ordnance creates. Even the cockpit canopy is coated with materials that absorb rather than reflect radar frequencies. But stealth is only one dimension of the capability advantage. The F-22's AN/APG-77 radar operates in ways that fundamentally change the electromagnetic battlespace. It uses low probability of intercept technology, which means it can detect and track enemy aircraft and missile systems, while remaining extremely difficult for those systems to detect that they are being tracked. The radar rapidly changes frequencies and uses sophisticated waveforms that look like background noise to enemy radar warning receivers. This creates a psychological and tactical problem for defenders that goes beyond technology. If you are an Iranian air defense operator and your radar warning receiver never alerts, if your tracking radar never achieves lock, if your system never even indicates that a threat is present, how do you respond? You cannot engage targets you cannot detect. You cannot launch missiles at empty sky based on intuition. The result is exactly what happened on March 28th, paralysis masked as restraint. The strategic implications extend far beyond this single penetration. Every military planner in Tehran is now recalculating the assumptions that underpinned their defensive doctrine. If F-22s can operate with impunity over Iranian airspace, then no facility is truly protected. The underground nuclear enrichment site at Fordo, buried beneath 200 feet of mountain rock, was considered safe because Iran believed they could deny the airspace above it. If they cannot deny that airspace, then American strike packages can loiter, conducting detailed targeting, coordinating with intelligence assets, and executing strikes at times of their choosing, rather than in rushed raids designed to minimize exposure. This fundamentally changes the timeline calculations for any potential strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. Previous assessments assumed that Iran would detect incoming strikes early enough to disperse personnel, activate additional defenses, and potentially hide critical materials. The March 28th operation demonstrates that American aircraft can be overhead before Iran knows they are coming. That compression of decision time is strategically decisive. Consider the second-order effects on Iran's regional posture. Tehran has built influence across the Middle East, partly through the perception that it operates from a position of defensive strength. Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq and Syria, Houthi forces in Yemen, all of these relationships rest partly on the belief that Iran itself is secure from American military action. When that security proves illusory, when Iranian airspace becomes permeable to American operations, the perception of Iranian strength degrades. This affects calculations in capitals across the region. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other Gulf states have been navigating a delicate balance between American security partnerships and accommodation with Iranian power. The March 28th operation provides data suggesting that Iranian power is more limited than recent years of regional aggression implied. That may shift diplomatic calculations toward more assertive stances against Iranian proxies. The operation also sends signals to Moscow and Beijing that extend beyond the Middle East. Russia has sold advanced air defense systems to Iran, Syria, and other partners with the explicit or implicit promise that these systems can contest American air superiority. The S-300 and S-400 sales to various nations rest on the proposition that Russian technology provides credible deterrence against Western air power. The March 28th operation provides evidence that stealth aircraft designed specifically to defeat these systems can do exactly that. China is watching with particular attention because the scenario has direct parallels to contingencies in the Western Pacific. Chinese military planners have built their own A2AD networks around the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait, using similar concepts to Iran's approach: layered defenses, integrated radar networks, terrain advantages. If those defensive networks prove as ineffective against American stealth aircraft as Iran's systems just demonstrated, then the entire strategic calculus for a Taiwan contingency changes. Beijing cannot assume that their air defense umbrella provides protection for an invasion force or denies American access to the battle space. But here is where the analysis requires complication and acknowledgement of what this operation has not proven. 47 minutes of reconnaissance and strike coordination is not the same as sustained combat operations. The F-22s were not conducting actual strikes against defended targets. They were not facing the full spectrum of Iranian defensive capabilities activated to maximum alert. They were operating in a scenario where Iran apparently chose not to engage, whether from inability or strategic calculation. That distinction matters because it leaves critical questions unresolved. Would Iranian defenses have performed differently if the F-22s had been conducting actual strikes rather than reconnaissance? Would the presence of strike packages with additional support aircraft have created different radar signatures or electronic emissions that enabled detection? We do not have definitive answers because the operation did not test those scenarios. There is also the question of why Iran chose not to engage. The public explanation from Tehran that no violation occurred is transparently false given CENTCOM's detailed statement and the fact that American officials specifically challenged Iran's denial. But false denials serve a purpose. They allow Iran to avoid the more damaging admission that they detected American aircraft and could not engage them. By denying the incursion occurred, Tehran avoids acknowledging defensive failure. But there is an alternative interpretation worth considering. Perhaps Iranian air defense commanders did detect anomalies, did suspect American aircraft were present, but chose not to activate tracking radars or missile systems, because doing so would reveal the locations and electronic signatures of their most advanced defenses. In that scenario, Iran sacrifices the immediate tactical response to preserve operational security for their defensive network. This interpretation has precedent. During the Cold War, both American and Soviet forces frequently chose not to engage aircraft that violated airspace, because doing so would compromise intelligence about radar capabilities, missile performance, or defensive positioning. If Iran made that calculation on March 28th, then the silence was strategic rather than evidence of complete defensive impotence. The challenge with this interpretation is that it still represents a strategic loss for Iran. Even if they detected the F-22s and chose not to engage, the fact remains that American aircraft operated over Iranian territory for 47 minutes, while Tehran took no action that would communicate deterrence to Washington or reassurance to regional partners. Silence, regardless of its motivation, projects weakness. There are also technical limitations to American stealth operations that deserve acknowledgement. The F-22 fleet numbers approximately 186 aircraft, of which roughly 120 are mission-capable at any given time. This is an extremely small force for global commitments. Sustained operations over Iran would require concentration of F-22s that leaves other theaters with reduced stealth capability. The aircraft also requires extensive maintenance, with each flight hour demanding more than 30 hours of maintenance work. This is not a capability that scales easily to massive sustained campaigns. The F-22 also has payload limitations that affect its utility in certain strike scenarios. Its internal weapons bays can carry 2 1,000-pound JDAMs or 8 small-diameter bombs. For missions against hardened bunkers or deeply buried facilities, the aircraft would need to carry larger ordnance externally, which dramatically increases its radar cross-section and negates much of its stealth advantage. The GBU-72 Advanced 5K Penetrator, the bunker buster that has been central to recent strikes on Iranian facilities, weighs 5,000 pounds. The F-22 cannot carry that weapon internally. This creates a scenario where F-22s excel at reconnaissance, strike coordination, and air superiority missions, but still require other aircraft for certain categories of strikes. The complete strike package would include F-15Es or B-2 bombers to deliver heavy ordnance, EA-18G Growlers for electronic warfare, and tanker support for extended operations. That larger package creates more opportunities for detection and engagement, even if the F-22s themselves remain largely invisible. What remains uncertain is the full spectrum of Iran's defensive capabilities and whether systems or tactics exist that were not employed on March 28th. Iran has claimed to possess radar systems operating in different frequency bands specifically designed to detect stealth aircraft. They have suggested that their integration of optical tracking systems, acoustic sensors, and other non-radar detection methods provide backup capabilities. We do not know if these claims represent genuine capability or propaganda because they were not tested in this encounter. The strategic picture that emerges from the March 28th operation is one of American air superiority demonstrated but not yet fully tested, Iranian defensive failure evident but not completely explained, and regional power dynamics shifted but not yet transformed. What has changed definitively is the psychological calculus. Tehran can no longer assume that its airspace provides protection. That assumption shaped Iranian decision-making about nuclear development, regional aggression, and resistance to diplomatic pressure. Without that assumption, Iranian calculations change. The timeline to potential American military action compresses. The cost that Iran believed it could impose on Washington through air defense networks becomes uncertain. The deterrent effect that those defenses provided diminishes. These changes do not make American military action inevitable, but they alter the strategic environment in ways that constrain Tehran's options. For American planners, the operation provides data about capabilities and limitations that inform future planning. They now have recent operational experience with F-22 penetration of advanced air defenses in actual contested territory rather than exercises or simulations. They understand Iranian decision-making under pressure and the timeline of Iranian responses. They have validated tactics, identified potential vulnerabilities, and gathered intelligence that could not be obtained any other way. The broader message to adversaries globally is that American stealth technology maintains a capability gap that defensive systems have not yet closed. This matters for deterrence in multiple theaters. It affects Chinese calculations about Taiwan, Russian assessments about NATO's eastern flank, and North Korean estimates of their own vulnerability. Every nation that has invested in air defense networks as their primary deterrent against American power is recalculating based on what just happened over Iran. What comes next will determine whether the March 28th operation was an isolated demonstration or the beginning of a new phase in the campaign against Iranian military infrastructure. American strike operations have already destroyed approximately 95% of Iran's Caspian naval fleet, degraded drone production facilities, and damaged petroleum infrastructure. The addition of F-22s conducting persistent reconnaissance over Iranian territory suggests that targeting is becoming more sophisticated and that future strikes may achieve precision that earlier operations could not match. The question is whether Iran adapts or escalates. Do they accept the new strategic reality and seek diplomatic off-ramps from confrontation they can no longer afford? Do they double down on asymmetric capabilities like proxy forces, cyber operations, and terrorism that do not require air superiority? Do they accelerate nuclear development under the assumption that only a nuclear deterrent provides security against American power? Each path leads to different futures, and Tehran's choice will shape the region for years. What we are watching is the transformation of a defensive doctrine that shaped Middle Eastern security for decades. Iran built its regional power on the foundation of defensive strength that made American military intervention costly enough to deter. That foundation just cracked. The silence from Tehran on March 28th was not the absence of response. It was the sound of strategic assumptions shattering. If you want to understand what happens when the second most sanctioned nation on Earth loses the one advantage it thought was secure, subscribe and turn on notifications. We are covering every development in this campaign as it unfolds, and what comes after this is going to reshape the entire region.